No fear, love that. Wish I had you in my ear yesterday as I was totally panicking about this gig. But we're here now and we're good. Thank you, Julie, perfectly moderated. Our next panel will examine the city's innovation precincts, and I'd now like to invite our panelists to the stage, please. On the panel is Professor Elanor Huntington, Executive Director for Digital National Facilities and Collections, CSIRO. Liza Noonan, Executive Director, Westmead Health and Innovation Precinct. Fun fact, we were lucky to have Liza speak at the Collaborative Leadership Program a couple of weeks ago. And Geoff Roberts, AM, Chief Commissioner, Greater Cities Commission. With Provocateur, Justin Koek, Director, Communications and Engagement, Western Parkland City Authority. The panel is titled Beacons of Opportunity, Examining the City's Lighthouse Precincts. Please welcome our superstars.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Justin Koek. I'm joining the vast roster of understudies that are joining you today. And for the key, yes, thank you for the vote of encouragement over there. For the keen observer, I'm not Dr. Sarah Hill, who is our CEO at the WPCA. Unfortunately, she has joined the ranks of the flu-ridden. But it is a great pleasure to be here with you today. As a lifelong resident of Western Sydney, and it's great to see so many fellow travellers in the audience today. As Faith was mentioning, the topic for our panel today is beacons of opportunity, the lighthouse precincts, and exploring those that the New South Wales government is envisaging, not only in Western Sydney, but obviously more broadly in New South Wales, but obviously today with a focus on those in Western Sydney. And we're talking about, in particular, the Western Sydney Aerotropolis and the Bradfield City Centre. That's the focus there, the Westmead Health and Innovation Precinct. And then further afield, Tech Central, Parks and Wagga SAPS. So I'd also like to encourage you all to put your questions into Slido or put a hand up. I'm sure there's a roving mic that will capture your questions. If you don't, I've been warned that Geoff will fill the awkward silence. So I caution you at the outset. But in tempting fate, I might throw the first question to Geoff, actually. And Geoff, I think there's been obviously a lot of work in putting together the vision for these precincts. And over the last couple of years, I think it's fair to say that the pandemic has systematically dismantled a lot of the attempts at aggregation and agglomeration that governments and the private sector have really tried to ingrain. Is pushing forward with these precincts more important than ever, given the dislocation that we've just experienced?
Thank you, Justin. Welcome everybody this morning. That previous panel wouldn't have existed if we hadn't been thinking about jobs in Western Sydney and precincts in Western Sydney. We had Vitex, SMBC and Hitachi. All three of those companies have been part of the journey for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So how awesome is that? Look, to cut to the chase, and Chris Brown always gives himself an hour to speak and a panel which I'm on 20 minutes to speak. We will deal with that at a later time. The core exam question for Western Sydney is still that we have not created enough jobs in Western Sydney. Yes, there's a housing crisis. Yes, there's an infrastructure crisis. Yes, there's a flooding crisis. Yes, there's a biodiversity crisis. But the fundamental city shaping issue for the next 10 years, 20 years and 40 years is that we just don't have enough bloody jobs. And they're not good jobs. So what we did when we started the whole journey of the metropolis of 3 cities, to repeat it again, the exam question is to create sustainable, resilient, world-class economies in Western Sydney that, as Anise said, creates 200,000 jobs. Now that's 3 Macquarie Parks in half the time, just to put that in context. Now, I think we've got the green shoots of being able to succeed with that. The AMRF announcement, the work being done at Liverpool, the amazing work being done at Westmead. The coalition with CSIRO is incredible, but we've only just started. We're only a pip of the way through that journey. And so while industry development is crucial and NETM is absolutely fundamental, if we don't have landing spots, if we don't have places that are curated for where these jobs are going to operate, then we will not succeed. And so what I love about the focus on the Aerotropolis and on Westmead is not to be exclusive of the other places, but to ignite, to use those as the lighthouse precincts for the greatest job density and the highest level jobs that we can be known globally for. So what COVID's done is quite confronting. There are two significant issues out of COVID in terms of cities the world over. One is the hybridisation of work. So we are possibly moving away from 30-minute cities now to 300-minute weeks. And the second thing is the fundamental changes that have happened in retail. So we've organised Sydney around strategic centres. There are about 25 of them. They're made up of regional shopping centres, a clapped-out RSL club, and a railway station, usually not well connected to the place. That's not going to work in the future. These places need to be the beacons for jobs in the future, and there are many of those in Western Sydney. So what has COVID done? It's made it even more important that we have a polycentric city, even more important that kids and our grandkids that grow up in Western Sydney don't have to schlep long distances to go to university and jobs a long way away. So I think that's why Westmead and the Aerotropolis and Tech Central and in the 6 cities, something to do with Newcastle, something to do with Wollongong and something to do with Central Coast becomes crucial.
Thanks, Geoff. On that point of curation, I might go to Liza. I think looking at Westmead, it's obviously got some natural assets there with the hospital precinct. Some might say that, you know, why does government need to be involved at all in a precinct that is quite obviously focused on health and the education that surrounds it? Can you tell us more about that need for curation and how you can actually leverage the advantages that we have there?
So you're absolutely right, Justin. We have some fantastic knowledge producing assets at Westmead. The hospital, the medical research institutes, 2 universities, CSIRO soon to be joining us. What we need to do, though, is make it easy for business to access that knowledge and actually translate that knowledge out to, create new jobs that are good jobs for the people of Western Sydney. And I would say Australia is well known for punching above its weight in terms of knowledge production. I think we're 0.3% of the global population, but 3% of total scientific output. But when it comes to business and industry, business and research collaboration, we are way down the OECD league table. And so part of the role of government is actually curating those services and being the concierge for business to come in and access that knowledge. So there's a number of things we're going to be doing we're already doing in the precinct, and we'll be doing in the precinct to make it easier for everything from commercialisation services, incubation, better places, better access to talent, and capitalising on the fact that we already Westmead is a great place to train to be a clinician or to have an amazing research career. Why not a medtech entrepreneur or a bioengineer? And how do we work with the local schools and some of the great ideas that have already been shared today to actually create that vision of jobs of the future, the skills pathways to get there? And I think that's the role of government.
And I think that strong emphasis on skills and training and education was something that certainly came through in the last panel. Elanor, you're part of an organisation that has been attracted by these beacons of opportunity in our lighthouse precincts, obviously Westmead, but also the Bradfield City Centre, where the CSIRO is going to have a presence. What's been the driving force behind those decisions?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and one of the things that so the role of CSIRO is we're Australia's national science agency. We were created. We were originally conceived of at around about the same time that Australia was conceived of, and we exist in that complicated liminal space between very fundamental research and industry. That was the idea right from the start. That's continues to be what we're here to do, and that makes CSIRO necessarily very open, very connected. We need to be engaged with all points of the ecosystem, and so that. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about COVID these days, and we talk about hybrid work. We talk about people not wanting to commute across large distances in order to come into work, all of that sort of stuff. But in the end, creative work is fundamentally, it's a contact sport. And that means that in order to be connected, we can't just be connected electronically. We have to be connected through a sense of place. So one of the things that this is a mutual value proposition. This is not just about joining Bradfield so that we become an anchor tenant and we kickstart the precinct with a significant presence. It's also that we get something out of that, and what we get out of that is the prospect of a precinct, the idea that we can engage with people who span all of our touch points in that complicated liminal space that we exist. And so that's what's so exciting about it. That's what makes it such a exhilarating prospect and something to be part of. It gives us an opportunity to pursue our particular objectives around consolidating our presence into a smaller number of larger footprints as well, again, around the idea that innovation and creativity is a contact sport. And in fact, if you look at the history of CSIRO, our sites these days tend to be in the centre of cities, but when they were first created, they were in the outer suburbs. There's a reason for that, and so we will continue to do that. The nice thing about some of these ideas around Westfield, about Bradfield, around Tech Central is that this is not just being plonked in the outer suburbs because land is cheap. This is because we're actually thoughtfully working our way through how we create a density of people, a vibrancy, an activation that already thinks about all of the essential ingredients for precincts in the sense of there's place, there's investment, there's a good reason for industry players to be there. There's the prospects for a skill base. There's education going on. There's a bunch of really good reasons why, if you were to sort of say we're looking for the Venn diagram of a whole bunch of stuff, we would choose places like this.
So we've been able to obviously conquer the distance that COVID has placed between us over the last couple of years. But as you said, Elanor, I really love this notion of creativity and knowledge exchange being that contact sport, and the very tactile nature of these precincts, having to get people together to really feed off each other and drive that creativity. One thing I really was interested in sort of getting all of your thoughts on is, this notion of lighthouses. Great analogy, and I'm going to try and labour that as much as I can. You're just lucky I'm not making too many dad jokes about them, which is my want usually. But lighthouses traditionally guide ships into safe harbour, but they can also make sure that that ships aren't crashing on the shoals.
I was going to say they are often also put on large pointy jagged rocks, but details.
Yeah. So what are the historical mistakes in the approach that we've taken to precincts that these lighthouse precincts are essentially directing those incoming ships away from?
I'll have a go. I think precincts that kind of go to what Elanor just touched about, which is the human-to-human interaction and actually programming serendipity to happen. I think sort of a more traditional concept of, precincts being a clustering of buildings and organisations that don't actually ever meet each other is kind of the old world. And I think from my perspective, a lighthouse should be great about grabbing attention and then also shining a light on all the other great stuff we have right here in our backyard. So yes, Westmead is a lighthouse for health innovation, but it's going to shine a light across all the other health precincts and all the fantastic things we do right here in New South Wales.
The fundamental problem we've had in Sydney and New South Wales is an everyone wins a prize approach to precincts. So I think the previous Secretary of Planning, Jim Betts, was trying to organise our New South Wales government precincts, and I think at last count there were 153 of them. So precincts that follow the political cycle or follow ridiculous cycles actually get in the way. So you actually have to pick winners. So that's the first thing. The second thing is lighthouse precincts can't be perfect. They have to be sandpits for innovation, and therefore you have to accept that as all the good books talk about startups and scale-ups and innovation, sometimes you're going to stuff it up, and that's kind of okay. One of the previous speakers talked about the other support services around a precinct. So you do need affordable housing, you do need placemaking, you do need fixie bike hire places, you do need drip coffee. I'm going to write a PhD one day on the coffee index related to innovation. I'm sure there's a link there. So they can't just be, I think the risk for Bradfield is it becomes just another business park. The problem with Macquarie Park is that it was organised around, it was really well done in terms of being aligned to a university and really taking a foundational client like Cochlear to the world. But the problem with Macquarie Park is the floor plate of the buildings are bad, and they were organised around, frankly, white middle-aged men driving their 5 Series BMWs into the underground car parks. Now, that doesn't make a global precinct these days. So we've got to confront the issue of connectivity. The soft stuff is actually the hard stuff.
Sorry to anyone driving a 5 Series BMW.
I was going to say, you will need to test your hypothesis around coffee, because coffee in Silicon Valley is still not up to Australian standards, but that's a whole other thing. But speaking of Silicon Valley, history is littered with stories of cities and countries trying to make their version of Silicon Valley or whatever the industry du jour is. And so you're right to call out that there are lots of ways to not succeed in making precincts. There's a set of ingredients that need to go into that. The way that you mix those ingredients depends on the maturity of the economy around it, the place around it, all of that sort of stuff. And I guess one of the things that I would suggest is that almost by definition, you're right. Almost by definition, a precinct is a concentration. So it's a higher density. It means that not everyone can win. There's a thesis for why that place, why that set of conditions, why that economy, why that investment. One of the things that we could globally be better at is thinking through and being conscious of the thesis for the why. And so that as we invest, we test that. One of the things that we like to do is put our toe in the water, have a go, and at the wrong time we might nickel and dime a particular activity. But if we've got a structured approach and a disciplined approach to having a clear set of hypotheses as to why we think this place, this precinct, this particular industry, then we can test that as we go. It's not about the milestones for a project. It's about the theory of change. I think we would all benefit from being a little bit more rigorous about that, because many people have written many books about all of the not successful attempts, and many people try to tell stories about what will make it work. The people who really know their stuff will often say, actually, there's a piece of magic there that just allows it to take off. And being disciplined about what our theory of change is, I think, would actually help a lot of these activities.
I think that is a nod to the stubborn, organic nature of places where people get together, and you can try and engineer it as much as you like, but in the end, people make a place the place that it is. Might just throw to some questions from Slido. And this is sort of picking up, I think, on your point earlier, Geoff, around the strategic centres. So obviously there's a big focus on jobs growth in Parramatta and Westmead. What is the New South Wales government doing for industry development in Liverpool, Penrith and Campbelltown? I might throw that one to Geoff.
So, not enough, but it's getting better. The Aerotropolis won't succeed without Penrith, Liverpool and Campbelltown, and vice versa. They're connected at the hip. They're not as well connected at the moment as they need to be a true ecosystem, and that's a fundamental piece of work that's still a work in progress. We've got major infrastructure plays in place, but we still need to do more. There is a Western Sydney Industry Fund that we need to move on, but I reckon now that Bradfield has got the fundamentals in place, AMRF, hopefully soon to be CSIRO, a number of other investors that I can see in the room today that I'm trying not to look at any of them. I think we can then start having a more adult conversation about how we bring the 750,000 people in Western Sydney. And by the way, this city is not outer metropolitan Sydney. That's kind of old thinking. This outer metropolitan Sydney is Circular Quay. Outer metropolitan Sydney is Circular Quay. If you think about the development of cities over centuries, the Eastern Harbour City probably will become Old Sydney. It won't be the place of commerce in the future. The place of commerce will be the centre of Sydney. The capital of metropolitan Sydney should be Parramatta, but the capital of innovation really should be Western Sydney. So we have to subliminally challenge the models that we've all grown up with. The centre of innovation in metropolitan Sydney is Western Sydney. Outer Sydney is Circular Quay and maybe Kirribilli House.
There you go. There's Mr. Geoff Roberts recasting the geography of Sydney as we speak, which is wonderful to see. I might take another question that's come through on Slido. This one's from Phil Davies, and I'm going to read out a stat here, Phil, that I'm assuming is correct. I'll assume it's correct because you put it into Slido, but it says here, Australia ranks 86 out of 133. Oh, hang on, someone's just taken my question away from me on my screen.
I think it's in economic complexity.
That's the one. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Thank you. In economic complexity. So how do we add greater value to our natural resources and leverage advanced manufacturing in Western Sydney? But I think it's a really good question about how we can actually leverage the creative oomph of precincts to really pull people together and really value add to the economic activity that we're generating here in Australia. And Elanor, I don't know if you wanted to take that one.
I was actually going to get Liza to kick off.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, I think part of this is we in Australia are really good at, in terms of innovation, business model innovation or process innovation, process improvement innovation. What we're not so good at is first to market and new technology innovation. And I think this is, and it's hard, having previously spent 6 years at CSIRO working in commercialisation and spin-outs, it's hard, and it's the stuff that the previous panelists from Vitex talked about, you know, actually getting a product from out of the lab and into development and into production is a hard slog. So in Precincts, if we can actually go beyond innovation theatre, which we unfortunately are pretty good at in Australia, to doing the hard yards, doing those sort of concierge services to work with. You know, we have a world-class regulator in the TGA. We have very well-respected clinical trial environment. How do we actually work with industry to understand some of those impediments to getting innovations out of our fantastic research institutes into first-to-market innovations?
And to amplify on that, if you look at some of the other statistics, I mean, most people know that Australia does not spend as much as the OECD average on R&D investment. If you break that apart a little bit, there are a number of different ways of thinking about it, one of which is who spends the money on R&D, another is who actually then makes use of that money, and there's also, are we talking about fundamental research, applied research and development? And one of the things about the Australian economy writ large is that Australia performs kicks above its weight in terms of fundamental research, generally done in universities, some of which is done in CSIRO. Australia also punches well above its weight in development. What we are undercooked in is applied research. And that's that messy middle, it's the valley of death, it's whatever you want to call it. And if you then go and poke around inside the OECD statistics, the countries that do this well, like America and Germany, it's businesses who invest in applied research. And what's more, it's a tiny handful of large businesses that have the patient capital necessary to do that. That's where most applied research occurs in those economies. So Australia's firm structure is actually an issue in Australia as well. And so, you know, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to suggest policy interventions, but there are some reasons. There are some structural. There's some issues imprinted in our structural DNA that speak to some of the challenges, and it's not a cause or an effect, it's kind of both. But one of the things that Precincts can do is they can lower the friction for that. We need to get better at occupying the valley of death if we're to actually do the things that we need to do in terms of maturing our economic complexity. My conclusion as a scientist would be that just like with other primary industries, Australia is actually a primary producer of great ideas. We generate fabulous primary ideas. We export them overseas. They get value added and they come back and we buy them back, and then we do little things on top of it. My aspiration for Australia would be that we don't do that so much.
Thanks, Elanor. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think we've reached the end of our panel. I'd really like to ask you to join me in thanking today's panelists, and thank you to the audience for sending through your wonderful questions. Thank you.